Get a head start on your next trophy buck. Order stand placement advanced techniques today at Closing the Distance.
Welcome to this week's Closing the Distance. I'm glad you're with us today. 2 hunts in Kansas, plus we have some really good information, some really good tips if you want to hunt outside your core area. Let's get started.
Closing the Distance is brought to you by Ozonics, undetectable, undeniable. Hunter Safety System, dedicated to saving hunters' lives. Executioner Broadheads, born to kill. Treason, don't just blend, become. And by Citadel, revolutionary shoot-down shape. Coming up, the guys are in Kansas, plus dozens of useful tips if you want to hunt outside your core area. We'll be right back. Closing the Distance is made possible by Matthew Solo Cam. Catch us if you can. Tree limb quivers. There's only one tree limb quiver. Sword sights. Sharp solutions in aiming. Elusive Wildlife Technologies, taking the elusive out of wildlife. The Stage Deer Attractant, finally, a synthetic scent that works. And by the amazing Luminaut. Can your arrow not do this?
This first hunt today, we're with Pro Staffer Chubb Clemens. Chubb's in Kansas, and this spot where Chubb hunts, it's 9 hours away from his house. Let's check in with Chubb.
Well, early season hunting this year started out kind of slow. I wanted to get up there in Kansas and try to get my buck tagged so that I could spend some time with my grandson this year, try to get him a good deer. And for most of you early season hunters, you know that the mature bucks sometimes are nocturnal. You just don't see them very often. And but I was getting some pretty good photographs on a couple of the stands and a couple of shooter bucks. And so we decided to go ahead and try them early. The deer are calm. They're usually, you know, they're not into the rut, so they're not very nervous. They're good about coming into the feed and staying fairly still. And so my wife and I went up on a hunt early, and we had been there for a couple of hours, had not seen a deer. And she doesn't hunt as much as I do, so she was saying, well, you know, what's up? Why aren't we seeing some deer? And I looked up, and this buck was coming across a field, coming dead straight to us, and he never stopped. He walked all the way in, came in calm, and just started feeding on some corn. And we waited and waited, and I just let her film, and she's a beginning cameraman, so we gave her plenty of time to get all the footage we thought we might need of this deer. He was a good shooter deer, and it was getting pretty late in the afternoon, and my eyes are not quite what they used to be. I knew when I drew and put the pin on that buck that something just didn't quite feel right. And I made a couple of adjustments and even moved my glasses a little bit. And I don't know what happened, but when I released that arrow, it didn't hit the deer. It just clipped him right across the top of the back. I shot completely over that deer. He acted like almost that I didn't even shoot at him. He ran about 30 yards, turned around, walked right straight back in, started feeding. You know, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And so I got another arrow, and I made good on the second shot. I made a decent shot on him. It wasn't a great shot. I hit him just a little bit far back, but still it was a pretty good shot. And we decided to let him lay a while, and we tracked him last night. And found where he had gotten laid down and got up and moved again. So I got afraid that we might be pushing him. We came back this morning and he had gone about another 100 yards. He's a mature buck. He's 11 pointer. Just probably a 6 or 7 year old deer.
After the break, Chubb discusses tips on how he's been successful year after year hunting away from home. Later on, Jim Rogers slams a nice buck. Don't go on your next hunt without knowing why you might miss. Get your free copy of Shot Placement 101 today. Details at closingthedistance.com. Closing the Distance is brought to you by Ozonics. Undetectable, undeniable. Hunter Safety System, dedicated to saving hunters' lives. Executioner Broadheads, born to kill. Treason, don't just blend, become. And by Citadel, revolutionary shoot-down shape.
Well, some people think that, they watch the TV shows and they see guys go up and they shoot a big buck. They don't really realize all the work and time that go into being able to take a good buck like that. My home range is here in East Texas in the Piney Woods, and Kansas is a whole different ball game when it comes to how you hunt and where you hunt and what kind of ground you've got to hunt on. Most of the ground here in East Texas are small acreages, 50, 100, 150 acres, are pretty good sized spots. Up there, you have large places that are several thousand acres. Years ago, when I first started going to Kansas, I hunted public ground, walk-in ground, and there were some good deer there. Really challenging hunting, and you better be willing to put in your time if you were going to get a shot. That public ground is for everybody, and you quite often you'll get messed up by another hunter that walks in that don't know you're there, or there may be a truckload of quail hunters drop off and there are dogs all over the field you're trying to hunt in, and so it can be a real difficult thing. You get a good setup, and if you get a shot at a buck, you may just be real lucky. But you did get to see some big deer, and I knew big deer were there. I was fortunate enough to have some connections with some friends and to get a ranch that was not hunted a lot. It was large. There's not a lot of hunting spots for a bow hunter on this ranch, particularly this one is a lot of range ground. It has a lot of fields, open country. The whitetails love it, but it's pretty difficult on a bow hunter that's used to sitting in a tree. I've gone to using some ground blinds to hunt some spots that I couldn't previously hunt, but I still like to climb a tree, even though I'm getting a little bit old for it, but I still like to do that. And we were able to get some prime ground that didn't have a lot of competition on it, and therefore we can be selective. We can wait on a good deer. We don't have to shoot a 3 or 4 year old deer. And the guys that I hunt with, we're all pretty well sold to the fact that we're going to try to shoot a mature buck. We're not going to shoot the younger bucks. And look forward, if we see a younger buck, we'll hope we get to see him sometime in the future. But the folks that think they're going to go up to Kansas and just automatically going to kill 160 or 180, it might happen. There's the possibility, but you're going to have to pay the price usually if you're going to kill a deer like that.
Most of the staff guys that hunt for Closing the Distance, we're based right here in East Texas. And our closest hotspot destination for us is Kansas. And that's even an 8 and 9 hour drive for us. And when you're considering hunting outside of your core area, number one, consider the time that it's going to take you to leave from your house to get there. And once you reach this 8 and 9 hour drive threshold, once you get past that, your body becomes fatigued. And what happens, that leads to a bad experience because you're just not going there one time. It takes a lot of work and time getting everything organized. And then the drive time behind the wheel is really critical. And that's why I talk to other hunters who may live in Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia, where their closest hotspot destination may be Southern Illinois, it may be Iowa. You talk to hunters who are in the Carolinas to where their closest hotspot is Ohio. They leave their home areas to go to these Midwestern states. And I also talk to hunters all the time who are in these Midwestern states to where their closest hotspot to them, maybe West Texas or Central Texas or some of the good hunting in Northern Texas. It's all about that drive time. And reducing that time, I guarantee you, will reduce having a bad experience.
Well, when we hunt in Kansas, you realize we are 9 hours away from home. Not to speak of taking a day to drive up. A lot of preparation has to go into where you're going to stay when you get there. When I first started hunting, I stayed in motels. Then I got a camper trailer. Then I got a bigger camper trailer. And if you've been in Kansas when it's 0 in a camper trailer, you know that's not a real comfortable place to be sometimes, even though it's better than a tent. I was fortunate enough to find a farmhouse for sale, and I bought an old farmhouse, and the guys that are on the club together, we all pitched in and we renovated and patched it up and made us a pretty comfortable place to stay. So now I kind of have a home away from home. Enjoy going up there in the summertime and just you know, ride around the lease and see some deer, or you know, just to be in that country again and have a comfortable place to stay. But it's just taken about 15 or 20 years to get to that point.
Coming up, Jim Rogers shares his Kansas hunt and gives us his story on why he's been successful outside his core area. Want more from Closing the Distance? Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram. Closing the Distance is made possible by Matthews Solo Cam. Catch us if you can. Tree Limb Quivers. There's only one tree limb quiver. Sword Sights. Sharp solutions in aiming. Elusive Wildlife Technologies. Taking the elusive out of wildlife. The Stage Deer Attractant. Finally, a synthetic scent that works. And by the amazing Luminaut. Can your aeronaut do this?
I went to Kansas for the first time in September, opening weekend of bow season. Checked my trail cameras, just did a quick little hunt for the weekend, and I had a lot of really good deer coming in. I mean, there were several, three or four good, solid mature bucks coming in. One of these bucks I called Scratches. You started looking at the camera, and he looked like an old warrior. He had scratches all over his neck, all over his chest, real tall-tined, high rack just in general, pretty heavy 8-point. You could tell he had been around for a long time. I came back the second weekend of October, and sure enough, this buck shows up. He comes in, I know him immediately. It's the buck I know is Scratches. I was debating on whether to shoot him or not when I have a lot of good bucks coming in. He was a good buck, but he wasn't quite what I wanted for Kansas, not what I pictured for Kansas. And I was on the fence about shooting him. I kind of made my decision, and he started facing towards me. He would not turn, give me a shot opportunity, even if I wanted to shoot him. He knew I was there. I had set that tent blind up the evening before, and you could tell that he was not used to that blind. I like to let tent blinds sit for a few days. He was not going to have it. He knew I was there. He would tolerate me, but he was not going to give me a shot opportunity. I came back to Kansas one more time. I decided it was going to be my last trip no matter what. I watched the weather. I watched the moon. I timed a trip. I headed down there. I said, I'm going to shoot the first buck that I see this trip. I've got several to pick from. The first mature buck that comes out, I'm going to give him a shot. And I kind of secretly hoped it wasn't Scratches. Sure enough, Scratches. I sit in the stand. I hadn't been there more than about an hour and a half after a 9-hour drive to Kansas, an hour and a half on the stand, and here comes in Scratches. He comes straight in, just like on a string, right to my shot.
I'm not kidding. Look at the size of this deer. This is a huge bodied deer. Matthews no cam. As you saw, he only went about 75, 80 yards. A really big, mature buck. Look at that. Look at that head on it. That big blocky head. This deer is twice as big as I am. I'm exaggerating, but he's still a big bodied deer.
So as I walked up to this buck, I saw that I'd figured him to be a 6.5-year-old, good mature Kansas buck, which meant he had a really big body on him. I walked up to him and he grew on me. I was thinking he might have been a 115-inch buck. I knew he wasn't very wide, only about 15 inches, but when I walked up to him in person, he was a lot bigger than I thought. Probably about 135-inch 8, had real good long tines, real heavy at the bases. Like I said, only a 15-inch spread. But it's always a good day whenever a deer grows on you instead of getting ground shrinkage. Well, my Kansas hunting experience started with public walk-in hunting areas. I checked out the Kansas Parks and Wildlife website, looked through the maps of the walk-in areas that were available, looked at the aerials, found some areas that I thought that looked like real good deer habitat, and I kind of came up with a plan. I picked the area that I did because of what it looked like by the aerials, and also because it's only a 9-hour drive. And it's basically as soon as I get to Kansas, I turn off the interstate and drive about another 20 or 30 minutes and I'm hunting. My first few hunts in Kansas on the public walk-in areas were good to me. I was seeing deer, I saw some good deer, but I found myself driving around during the midday because no matter how you cut it, the walk-in areas are still public land. I ended up dealing with people pulling up in the middle of the hunt, walking around me, stands popping up around me and stuff. So it was a good experience, but at the same time, I had that longing for some property of my own that I had permission for me only to hunt. Next thing I know, I'm driving down some roads. I find an area that I think looks good from the road, and I started calling around trying to figure out the landowner. Eventually, I figured out who the landowner was, and on the way back from Colorado, I'd killed an elk in Colorado, and I drove through in Kansas on the way back home to Texas. You've got to be efficient on your time in these out-of-state hunts because you only don't have the luxury of just running down to the lease for the weekend. You've got to be as efficient as you can with your time. So I drove by this guy's house. I pulled up there with an ice chest full of deer meat, and I offered him an elk ham and asked him for permission to hunt, and he agreed. And then for the last 4 or 5 years, that's where I've been hunting in Kansas. Got a quick tip for you. When you're hunting out of your core area, you may or may not have a lot of time to scout, so you got to be efficient. So what I do a lot of times is first thing I do, I go to a property, I look at the browse. I look for browsing evidence along vines and small trees and shrubs. You can look at each one on this greenbrier here, for example. You can see where the deer are eating the leaves off of this greenbrier and the tips of these. You look around like a beautyberry and stuff. There's some beautyberry. Depends on the area. Trees are going to differ where you are. The main thing is to find out the trees in the area that the deer like to browse on. It may be ash, elm, hackberry, mulberry. Just kind of depends where you are. Stuff like greenbrier. A lot of vines are very good for browsing. They're going to look like they're going to have a pulled end because the deer don't have teeth on the top of their mouth there. So anyway, a lot of times they'll have kind of a pulled look, like it was pulled off, and be a little extra deal on the flattened out tip there wherever they bit off. So whenever you're evaluating property, it may or may not be during deer season. You have to get in and out real quick. What you need to do is learn the trees and shrubs for that area that the deer prefer. It's going to differ by the time of year. It's going to differ by the area that you're in. If you're there during spring and summer, a lot of times these deer disperse and you may not be able to see a lot of tracks, a lot of droppings, everything's green. It might be kind of hard to detect what's going on there during deer season. If you look at the browse and you see that past browse evidence, that's usually came during the late summer, fall, during the hunting months. So that'll give you kind of a snapshot in time of what was going on during hunting season. It might give you a better idea of where to set up a property to hunt or an area within a property to set up on. A deer can only reach to about a height of about 5 feet or so. So when you're evaluating the browse on a place, you're going to look from 5 feet down. You're going to look for these browse tips. You may look for tips, or you may also look across the landscape and kind of look at about a 5 foot level. Sometimes you'll have a browse line where there's nothing growing from about 5 foot down, and that'll tell you that there's a pretty good deer density in that area.
You know, as hunters, now more than ever, we're wanting to travel outside of our core area to our new hotspot. And I guarantee you, to be successful year after year after year, you need to reduce that travel time to get from your home turf to your new core area. Because if you understand that value of time, I guarantee you that it's going to intercept some problems for you, and I guarantee you, you'll have fewer bad experiences. Let's check in with Brother Mark.
On today's show, we're getting some great tips about what it means to hunt out of state and to find a destination out of state to hunt in. And it's important to know these tips because you can have a bad experience, but you can't let the fact that you just had a bad experience ruin the fact that you don't want to continue to adventure out and try. There's some phenomenal hunting opportunities around our country if we would just take these tips into consideration and make a good choice and a good decision. But I think about this a lot because as a pastor, you don't know how many people that I have run into over the years that have went to church somewhere and had a bad experience or a bad encounter, and they just say, that's it, man. I've been to church, I had a bad experience, a bad encounter, and that's it. I'm never going to church again. And I think how crazy that really is, because we don't really treat anything else that way. I mean, we don't go to a restaurant and get a bad hamburger, right? And eat a bad hamburger and go, that's it, I'm never going to eat hamburger again. Hamburgers are horrible. Hamburgers are terrible. Not really. You just had a bad hamburger at that particular restaurant. There's a ton of great places out there that make great hamburgers. And I don't want to, trivialize it, but I do want to say at the same time that, listen, not all churches are created equal. And the bottom line is, if you had a bad experience in church, maybe you had a bad encounter, maybe you had some people somewhere that, maybe treated you bad or maybe didn't treat you the right way or whatever may have happened, don't give up on church. Don't give up on God just because you had a bad experience somewhere. Listen, there are a lot of churches out there, great churches, that are full of people that love you, full of pastors that are preaching God's word, that care about their people, that are shepherding their people. And for you to give up on that experience is really to forfeit and to rob yourself of an experience that could change your life for the better. I want to encourage you to keep looking, keep searching, keep adventuring out, because God's waiting on you on just the other side. If you'd like to know more about a personal relationship with God through His Son, Jesus Christ, just go to closingthedistance.com and click on the Moment of Truth tab.